Welcome everyone. Just going to give this a moment to get people to load in. Still going there. I'll just be patient for a moment. Still climbing. All right, it's been about a minute there. We'll let the rest filter in, but I think we're looking good to get started. A little bit of maintenance items at the top. So as I always say, the chat's available to everyone. So if you want to use the chat for fun stuff, banter, etc., please do. If you have questions you would like us to answer as we go along, and by us, I mean our expert, Sai, then drop them in the Q&A, and that way we can keep an eye on them and make sure they're accounted for or get back to you if we have not gotten to your question during the actual webinar. We're going to drop a quick poll for you right now. So this is a third of three in a series, but based on feedback and registration, we're happy to do more. So we always say these are for you. If you would like us to keep going in this series, vote for it and let us know what you would like us to cover. Sai's pretty much expert in the area, and so we're happy to continue creating these, going deeper. And then the last thing I'll mention for everyone is, especially this being the third in the series, this is not meant to be an Augment demo. So for those of you who may be new to the series or wanting to know more about Augment, we're going to drop a demo link in the chat. If you want to know more about Augment and how we help, with Intune and your general M365 security, please do reach out. This is a value add series where we're trying to go deep in Microsoft 365. This is not a marketing webinar at all. So with that said, I will pass it on to Sai, the hero of the hour.
Hi. Thank you, Robbie. So some background about me, I've joined Augment November. I've done a couple of these series now. I have over 12 years of experience in the MSP area. The last 4 years focusing more on cybersecurity. I enjoy board games and escape rooms and solving problems. Uh, so today we're going to go over mobile application management, the use cases, support devices, and then covering how conditional access can be used in conjunction with that. So what is mobile application management? So we've covered Intune a lot, which is MDM, mobile device management. Mobile application management is a subset of Intune, and it's used primarily for data protection. So if you want to make sure your data is secure, you use application management in addition to MDM. Access control, you can control things such as compliance required for the application use, the actual usage of the application, as well as configuration and updates. So you want to make sure your users are using the most up-to-date version of the application. You can control that with mobile application management. And the main concern I think people have is the app management on personal devices, which we'll get into a lot. And like I mentioned, conditional access, conjunction of using these application managements with conditional access to enforce your control over the application. So the use cases for application management, you want to configure specific apps, control access to the apps, like Outlook and Teams being the most common one. The main case is like you have your devices enrolled in MDM Intune already, so you've ideally configured the configuration compliance policies we've talked about previously. You can check out those webinars if you need information on that as well. But more granular control over the specific applications. Perhaps you have company enrolled mobile devices or even personal devices, BYOD, where you're accessing Outlook or Teams or email, and you want to make sure that the people are using Outlook for email access instead of just whatever email provider they have application-wise. Similarly, if devices are associated with a single user, I'm one person, but I have like maybe I have a laptop and a desktop and I have a phone and a tablet, and I'm accessing all various applications throughout the different devices. You want to make sure that the application use per device is kind of configured with a similar policy in mind, so that way you're not having different kinds of policies for different devices that could leave you vulnerable and exposing your company data. In some cases, you have devices that are managed by another MDM provider. Maybe you have a secure vendor that you're working with as a client, and they require you to use their devices to access their stuff. But you still need to access your email to communicate with your team effectively. You can use mobile application management to still have control over your application while not enrolling the whole device. So it gives us a lot of granular control there. And I can go in here. We're going to go into some demos of what that looks like in the different setup environments. So first, we'll start with our handy dandy Intune. So Intune is where we're going to configure all this. So again, going over the use cases, you don't necessarily have to have a device enrolled in Intune to use mobile application management, but you can use it, mobile application management for devices in Intune and otherwise. And what we go through is in the Intune portal, intune.microsoft.com, we navigate to applications, and we'll start with first configuring applications. So I have a demo here that I made, but I'll just go through the template setup. So you create a managed apps configuration here. You get to name that as you see fit. And you can choose where the policy applies to. You can choose specific apps if you want to. Maybe you just want to have all the apps that you have, or you can choose all Microsoft apps. You can go very granular with this, custom apps and such. For right now, we're going to be concerned about Microsoft apps. Here you can get links of which apps are targeted for each different device. Primarily, it's going to be the main common ones: Outlook, Word, Edge, Teams, the whole Office suite. And it's various for different devices. For example, Access wouldn't really be applicable in Android, but it would be in Windows, various applications like that. And then here we have a familiar settings catalog, which you've seen in previous Intune webinar, where we've configured settings catalog for configuration. It is slightly different for the app configuration. It's more granular. There's not as much control, but we can kind of get a list of the different categories. You see here, it's only Edge that's affected. Other applications are kind of configured in different sections, which we'll get into later, but you can kind of control the default behavior of Microsoft Edge. The reason I think Microsoft has this for is most things are web-based applications, and you want to have your Edge managed as for access. So you can control different categories here. Like the settings catalog, you select a category, you select the setting here. You can choose whether it's enabled or disabled. Like we don't want people to be able to cast for their devices that are managed or the applications that we want secure settings on. You can choose to block extensions types or remove extensions, installations, game settings if you're into that. But yeah, you have a lot of control here. I'll just kind of switch to our demo. But essentially, editing this one, we have configured a couple different settings. And the settings catalog, which are here, you can get pretty controlled with it. You can even set like home pages for the Edge browser. So if they open Edge, it'll go to the default web page. You can choose the behavior of it. And the next settings are, you can choose general configuration settings. If you're using a tunnel, like a VPN configuration, which you do have to have pre-configured ahead of time, you can set up that here. You can choose what kind of VPN tunnel to use. Essentially, any traffic within the managed Edge browser will go through your tunnel. So if you're very secure that way, you can. And then various little other settings here, like manage bookmarks, URLs, etc. And then similarly, like our other Intune policies, this page should be very familiar by now. You can include groups that are assigned to it. You could exclude groups. Perhaps you want all users. Maybe you put all users in there, or Intune based, like we talked about, like a general profile. Or maybe it's only a subset of your employees that need to have this kind of granular control. you can choose the specific groups. Yeah, and then if you prefer all users included and exclude certain groups, that's also a configuration that you can use. That's kind of where you start. Once you have that configured, the next area, let's like I talked about, that's mostly for Edge.
Hey,
You
if
want
you don't mind my interruption,
to, sure.
someone's asking if there's a way to search through the catalogs. Are you
Yeah,
aware of, like, if you were trying to find something like default homepage, assuming that's a setting?
most definitely. I'll show you real quick. Um, Go to the catalog. You can search. Choose a normal one. Yeah. So add settings. We'll just do like so you can search and hit enter and it'll show you the similar ones. Anything that matches on it. It's a great thing that I use a lot. And then when you enable the setting, it'll go under its subcategory since we already have an idle action. It'll show up under the idle browser action. So you see that's not there.
So if you edit a section, you get the pickers, but if you edit the settings catalog at the top, then you get to search through the catalog itself.
Yeah, you can search through it. And then if you add something that's already existing, it'll show up under but if it's something new and I select a thing, it'll show up at the top. So it's not alphabetical necessarily initially when you're configuring it. It will alphabetize when you go in and edit it after. So it's good, handy. If you're doing a lot of policy changes, that kind of gets confusing if you decide to bounce back and forth, like, okay, I want this, and then you go to turn something else on. And it's like, oh, actually, I forgot this other thing that I need to add for the Edge website type of protections. But then I'm not seeing it at the top. It's like, where did it go? It'll show up underneath the actual category to keep it organized that way. So just a good heads up there. Yeah, the search works here. Same thing with the settings catalog for application configuration. You can search. One caveat I'll mention, it's not applicable here because everything is basically listed under Microsoft Edge. Like there's Edge as the top category and everything is a subsetting of Edge. But if you're in the other application catalog, might want to be careful because if you search for something, you will get that specific setting, but there might be other settings in that category you're missing out on that might be applicable. So just a reminder when you do set something up, just check the other settings in that category as well. But again, not applicable for the app configuration policy that we're in,
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's mostly for Edge there. So next we want to configure policies for different applications like Outlook, Teams. We go to policies for Microsoft 365 apps. And just a reminder again, this is for not limited to Intune managed devices. This is for BYOD as well. We'll get into how that works after the fact, but you can kind of set the policies as needed. You can create separate different policies for maybe you have a different policy for BYOD as opposed to company devices. So we'll do the devices for this one. So here you can choose a scope, like all users or specific groups, like I mentioned, or anonymous. Maybe you have a guest user policy, like so you have external guest users that access your documents. You can make a policy specifically for those users that access the web. So you have a lot of basically here, it's all the controls you can think of. Same thing, you can kind of search for it. So and maybe, I don't really care about access. I want to see just Teams. You can create a new filter. I'll just call this Microsoft Teams. And I'm going to look for only the policies that apply for Teams. And I'll hit create. You can get more granular, but I just want to see what the policies are for Teams. Okay, so for Teams, I can configure whether they can purchase devices in the device store. Not configured. No, we don't do that. So I'm going to go ahead and enable the setting, and I'll disable that so that they're not allowed to do that. I get hit apply. Restrict sign-in team accounts to specific tenants. Maybe you want to make sure that your tenants, your users are only logging into your teams and not other teams, like maybe their own personal ones. You can do that here, enabled, and you'd have to pull your tenant ID, and you get that from the Entra portal. Just the overview portal gives you your specific tenant ID. You can have multiple tenant IDs. Maybe you have approved clients that you're allowed to sign to a team's environments. You can add them in there as well. And then prevent Microsoft Teams from starting automatic installation. That's preference, But yeah, you can kind of go through and choose whatever kind of settings you want. When you've set the settings that you like, you'll hit next. It'll show you kind of an overview of what you're doing. We unselected everything, so there's nothing here. And you can create the policy. Again, the scope is modifiable. We have it set to all users. As we saw, there's a couple different options. You can choose specific groups, and basically this one is just for external users using anonymous access. Yeah.
Okay, so
So
I'll throw a big one at you, which I think is related, but you'll be able to tell me if maybe you're catching on this one later. So the question goes, one of our challenges is deploying Intune to employees' personal phones to enforce things like conditional access across, Microsoft. Users are resistant on this, and they want to know if we can use app protection policies instead to protect the corporate data on those devices.
yes, that's what we're getting into here. It's a great question, and that's
I was
kind
a
of
little bit early. Okay.
yeah, yeah. So we've created we'll say we've configured this. We've now created policies to collect to protect our well, the next step is a protection policy here. You would choose kind of like the OS. I'll just choose this one and the properties here. So you can choose specific settings that you want as well. Whether you want to allow backup or not, whether what kind of specific settings you're allowing for the applications. Um, yeah, I'll go through this and then we'll go touch on that. But essentially, you can get very granular. I'll just make a new one. We'll just say this one's for iPad or iOS. So we've created the application stuff. Now we're going to go specific about like more granular controls for the protection of the application. We basically, well, we don't want them to back up the stuff to their phone because this is going to be for specifically BYOD. Um, and then, okay, there's org data in our applications like Team or Outlook. I don't want them to share that with other applications. So I'm going to say I only want this to be shared with policy managed apps. So apps that we manage for policy, like so Teams and Outlook, I can share between that. That's allowed. You could choose none as well if you don't want any sharing. You could choose exemptions and universal links. I don't want people to save copies of work data, so I'm going to block that. And you can restrict cut, copy, and paste between other apps. So again, policy management apps, you can allow pasting. With paste in, I believe the difference here is you can paste, but you cannot share it outwardly. So this is like more secure. So a good use case is if you're using a password manager, you have to paste like passwords in. That's a good point here. You can even choose a character limit if you want to. Third-party keyboards you can block if you want to. Encrypting data required, etc. Printing. I don't want people to print from their personal devices. I can go through this. I can set it up as I want. You can even set up requirements for access. So this is kind of neat because you don't, in a BYOD, you don't control that user's device. It's their personal device. And we're not rolling the whole device into Intune. That's kind of the point of this. They want their own personal device, but they want to access our company resources. So we do is we set up a requirement. So this is going to all be managed through the Intune company portal, which we went over before. But essentially, there's an Intune company portal that you can download on your phone, mobile device, or Windows device. And you can also get to it from portal.manage.microsoft.com. You would sign in with your account. Okay. We're not configured here. Sorry. I'll bring that up in another one. You can sign up with your account. My credentials here. And you would get a similar page, basically into portal. The applications that are managed by your company would show up here. You can install the application from the portal app. When you install from the portal app, it's managed by your environment. So the application is managed, not the device. And you can set settings such as, in order to access our Outlook, you need to have a PIN on your device, a minimum PIN of 4 length or whatever you want. You're allowed to use biometrics, we're determining. But if you're going to use biometrics, we want you to use more secure biometrics. And then if you're going to change your biometrics, you need to have your PIN. You can set all that stuff here. You can even you need to change your PIN after a certain amount of days if you want to. This one, so again, it's important to note, you're not changing the phone. you're not able to control the phone. But what happens is if the person's phone does not meet these requirements or device, they won't be able to access Outlook. So if they're compliant and they have everything set up, they're accessing Outlook or Teams to their phone. But if, like, for example, they disable a pin on their phone and they try to open Outlook, it'll say blocked or not able to access it. They don't meet the requirements. Um, you can set the devices of what you want. Uh, you can set conditions as well, like if they get the wrong amount of pins, there's like they have to reset their pin or a grace period if it's like a certain period of offline. This one's a good one, the grace period of 90 days. If the device never checks in for 90 days, like they don't log in Outlook, it just wipes the data. And again, it's not wiping the phone because we don't manage the phone. It's just wiping the company data stored on the device.
A question that popped in is, so you mentioned that apps installed from the portal are managed. What if the app was installed by the user rather than through the portal, or I guess pre-existed on the phone?
Great question. So this is why we need the policy set up. If they previously installed a policy, install the application, added it through the phone, it's not technically managed. You would create the app protection policy after the fact, and then it's gonna kind of lock that existing application out. And we're gonna get into that with conditional access as well. So I think I'm coming up with next, but yeah, so if I installed Outlook on my phone, my company didn't set up any policies. There's nothing blocking me from doing that currently. I have it working on my phone. I then go in and later create this app protection policy for Outlook. Um, it's going to go and review that existing policy because I've signed into Outlook with my phone before. It'll likely block the access to the Outlook until I install the company portal. The company portal is acting as kind of the gateway because we don't have the device managed through Intune. The Intune company portal acts as that authenticator kind of application. It's checking the settings on the phone to make sure it matches for the application, enforces the policies. Um, so if I have Outlook installed, I'm pretty sure the setting is, there used to be that where if you create a policy after the fact, it's going to kind of like remove the access to the existing phone. Like when they try to Outlook up, if I try to use Outlook now after the policy's been applied, it's not going to get new data. It's still on there. Unfortunately, because the policy applies after the fact, the data that is on my phone is still on the phone. So people can kind of like export existing data if they wanted to, like old emails and stuff like that. There's an option within Microsoft 365 admin portal to kind of wipe that data remotely. That's through the user pane, I believe. You just go to like navigate to users, find that person's account. You go to the Outlook tab and then kind of just wipe the data remotely. So that can wipe that data out as long as it's checking. And again, just wipes it from the application.
Okay.
Cool. So we set up policy. We can create assignments. In this case, this is for iOS devices. Maybe I make a group just for iOS devices, or I can make it for anyone. It's only going to apply to iOS devices in general, and then I'll create the group as needed. Uh, So in this scenario, we have now created a configuration policy, which is for Edge, essentially, a policy for 365 apps, which covers our Microsoft apps, and we've covered a protection policy of what we want our devices to look like in order to access these applications. This is looking good. And so now we want to deploy that for our end users. And we want to make sure that they're only accessing the company approved devices or applications through our to grant access here. So what do we do for that is we're going to use conditional access. Let's switch back here to our slides.
And before we jump to that, if so obviously you've dealt with this for a long time. You have best practices. I know you're well in tune with meet compliance standards. If someone is trying to do this for the first time and trying to guess at the best recommended settings, where do you suggest they start?
Yeah,
And like not a list of settings, but like how would they find best practices at any point in time?
it's a great question. So the first resource I always go to is Microsoft Learn. That one shows you how to implement their stuff. And so far, like when we go through these, they kind of start out with pretty good best practices as their default settings now, which is I find pretty great. But I kind of reference CISV 8 as my go-to, like NIST compliance of what the best practices are. Those are updating like every year or so. Like for example, like one of the minimums, like in our test here, it's had the pin length being set to 4. The best practice now is like 6 or more. So some stuff like that you can change. you can always update these as you go. If you decide, you set a policy up and then like a year later you're reviewing and it's like, oh, you know what, this is no longer best practice. You can go in and change your existing policies, and it's just going to update people. So it'll give them a prompt update. But yeah, I'm constantly staying on top of like my go-to is NIST, referencing CIS for the
Yeah,
best practice.
CIS definitely has breakdowns of this setting, that setting, so on and so forth for Android, iOS,
Yeah, they go through different
Mac, and
ones.
so forth. Yep.
That's my personal go-to. Cool. Great question. Switch back to the slides for a moment. Um, so yeah, supported devices, we covered Android, iOS, Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. Chrome OS is not supported for mobile application protection. You can do some application management there, but the protection policies don't really work in Chrome OS, so that's why it's not listed here. Um, and now we'll talk about conditional access. So we kind of glazed over this, but we're going to go over conditional access for mobile devices, like specifically Outlook or Teams. Device compliance, location, user risk. I'll show you what that looks like here. So let's start with where we left off. So we have created these policies. We want to make sure that people accessing devices, I'll just make a new policy so we can see what that looks like. So for mobile devices, we want this to apply for all users who are using mobile devices. And so we're going to kind of jump around here. Any users that are trying to access any of our applications, or maybe we want to choose only specific applications. Like maybe, for example, right now, we only care about Exchange Online. Uh, so we only care about like how they access their mailbox. So we're going to choose like, okay, all users accessing Office 365 Exchange Online, and then we choose specifically from mobile devices. So we're going to go ahead and say Android, iOS, and if some people are using Windows Phone, sure. We don't care about them using Windows and Mac because maybe we have an existing policy in place about Intune, they're Intune enrolled. So we're caring about the people using Android, iOS, and Windows Phone trying to access Exchange Online. We're going to make it so that in order for them to access, any user to access from this device, Exchange Online, they need to have a app protection policy. So that's a potential there. Or you can choose, it used to be required approved application. That's an option for like requiring Outlook, but the more secure one is app protection policy. So in this scenario, we created the app protection policy over here, where we designed what we want for them to access from iOS. We had one for Android as well. So it needs to have an app protection policy applied to that user, which will then apply to the device. In order for that app protection policy to apply to the device, they need to have Intune Company Portal installed first. So we get to choose if we also want MFA, we can. We can choose MFA as well, and we can choose to have a higher strength if we want to. Like maybe we want MFA that requires a phishing resistant MFA, such a FIDO2 key or TOTP. We get to choose that kind of level of control. But for right now, we only care about they need to have an app protection policy to be able to access Outlook Online. Select, and we create that policy. You can also have, if you want to, like session control, which is like sign-in frequency. You can do different types of controls here. Maybe like, okay, they have to log in every 10 hours or something. So it's here, hours or days. You have a lot of control over conditional access. And then we create that policy. I already have one, so let's turn this one off. So that again controls sorry, I made a I don't have a policy applied to this one yet. We have one already set up here. And then sorry, going through the list here. So that's how you can enforce specific application for specific mobile devices. You would then now want to have for blanking.
The error threw you off.
Yeah, yeah. Location. So we have determined, okay, they're going to be able to access this from these devices, from this application, and we want to also control, you know what, we only want specific locations to be able to access this. Like maybe they can only access it from the office IP address. So under name locations, same in conditional access, you can kind of create a new IP range location. Um, we have one here for the demo. It's generic. It's not real. But you can kind of create an IP address or a country access. With the IP address range, you create, let's say, office. You can include multiple, maybe you have multiple offices or maybe you have multiple IP addresses. You would just put the IP address in. And the important thing here to note is you do need to have a subnet. So just -32, -29, whatever it is your subnet is, put that in there. And you can have multiple IP addresses in this range here. And you can choose to mark it as a trusted location. So if I know, like, okay, these IP addresses are our office, I know that they're safe, they're our office, and they're trusted. You can have policies that maybe say, like, okay, we want strict policies and control, application control, unless they're in our office, and we can be more lax with it because our office is very secure. Um, you can then create a policy to reference those. So maybe we'll just do, maybe we want specific devices or things only to be applicable from the office. You can choose to have that configured here. So all trusted networks and location, we can grant access, or we can do a block access. Let's say everyone is not allowed. We're not going to allow any access to this application or any of our applications for this specific group. Maybe we have a very locked down group that is working on something very privileged and they're not allowed to access to anything from anywhere except for um, selected locations, like maybe only trusted locations. So I've had that happen with one group where they were working on a very confidential flagship project for a client. And so they were actually very strict. It was kind of nice because they got like catered, like really nice food, but they had to actually stay on site for like a whole week. So there were accommodations set up. They were shuttled to the accommodations and they were shuttled back to the office. But they were not able to like share anything or access any resources outside of the data. Uh,
I'll say that what you just did there policy wise is one of those that's a little hard to grasp sometimes. We have a few of those built in to augment by default because what it is essentially is a double negative. So the policy by default is set to block, but then you're saying except for these people within
yes.
these trusted locations, which is a more generic way of saying only allow these people to access these things when you're inside the network. But rather than constantly having to specify who gets access, you instead specify no one gets access except these people.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's two ways. It's a common thing that comes up a lot is block versus access, which is better. I think in security, we end up leaning more towards it's better to block by default and then exclude rather than having like an allow list or a block list. Um, so you can have grant access, which would be inverted. So the opposite would be we grant access for specific people in the trusted locations. Um, sorry,
But that's not an express block.
yeah. In this case, it would be yeah. Grant access would be allowed from only specific locations, trusted
Yeah.
locations. There'd be no exclusions in this case. Yeah, only trusted locations would be granted access. Um, so in this case, it's going to be because you grant access, only ideally it's a specific target group, not all users, would be granted access, and it would by default block things that are not in that trusted location or in that group. Um, they both work almost equally effective. I think it's just kind of the definition is block by default seems to be more secure, just because the door is closed except for certain people. Whereas this one has like it's open and then it closes it on some people. So, but that's how you configure locations. You can do various things. I've had clients set up different types of things. Perhaps they have MFA very strict enforced outside of environment where they like prompt it for it all the time. But at the office, they're more relaxed with the MFA prompts, stuff like that. Or there's registering security information, like if you're going to reset your password or change your MFA methods, they sometimes are restricted to be only within the office. So you can set up stuff like that here with conditional access. It's really great.
So
Um,
to circle back to one of the earlier questions, now that we've seen the app protection and how that plays with conditional access, what would you say are the main differences between completely enrolling a device to be corporately managed versus the app protection policies?
Great. Yeah. So completely managing the device is going to give you way more control. So one of the conditions I mentioned with the app protection policy, like we can set up the policy requirements of like what we need for devices. And we'll see this is kind of similar to our compliance policies we set up before of what we want to be compliant. So you set up like it needs to have this pin, it needs to be this character, it needs to have like a timeout activity of this. The difference is with the app protection policy, you don't get to change any of those settings on the device. You're basically just putting in like, hey, Intune company portal is installed on the device, and it's checking the settings and granting access if you meet the settings. If you don't have those settings in place, then you're kind of like, you just can't use the application. That's what application protection
Hmm.
policy does.
Yep.
Um, if you have a device management, you can enforce those conditions upon the device. And so it forces like the configuration policies then forces those conditions to be enabled. Whereas with application protection, you don't have that kind of granular control of the device. The same thing is with mobile device management, you have the ability to wipe the device entirely or really configure it or reset it remotely, lock it down. With mobile application protection, you can't control the device. You can't wipe the device. You can only remove your data from the device. So uh, it's really about setting this up properly. Like I think one of the default settings is making sure the device isn't rooted. That's a very good setting to have. Yeah, no jailbroken or rooted device will block the access. Again, if you had MDM set up, you would be that would not be possible on there once they wipe the device. So you
So
get
to finish answering that question, I think it's not an or. The question is not should I have the device managed or set up conditional access? It's more of a should I have the device managed or app protection policies in place? And in either case, conditional access should be there to gate access to the M365 applications environments.
oh yeah, so you can use MDM with MEM, and you should in either case, I think you should utilize conditional access, give licensing for it, which is just a P1.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, conditional access is going to be kind of your gatekeeper, and we're kind of getting into some of those policies here. For example, we mentioned compliance and configuration. It kind of gets one of the big policies here that's really helpful is device compliance for conditional access. So we've set up Intune, you've enrolled a device, we've set up app protection, um, but that device, in order to grant access, by default, there's access, whether it's compliant or not. This conditional access is kind of like I don't know, the authority figure of it all. So we have all users, all resources, and we're going to select the condition for devices. Any device, we can choose specific ones, but our main thing that we're looking for is device compliance. So in our previous sessions, we've set up a device, we've set up the configuration compliance. The compliance checks the settings, kind of like we were just talking about app protection policy. Same thing, it checks the device settings to see if it's applicable. In the application protection one, the Intune company portal manages whether you grant access to the application. If you have a device completely enrolled, the conditional access here is checking if it's variable. So like if a device is compliant, you get access to Microsoft 365 or whatever applications. We can choose a policy here where if the device is not compliant, they don't get access. So I don't know if that answered the question, or if it's over
Yeah,
explained.
and that section falls under mobile device management, right?
This is either or.
Right.
So this one you can apply to. So this one specifically, the way this one's set up, it's any device. And you get to choose that again in the conditions devices. So we chose any device here,
Okay.
but you could choose specific devices. So in our case, like for example, we have any device. If we have a mobile device thing, we're probably going to want to exclude the mobile devices because they're going to be protected by only the application management protection. Whereas the other devices that are Intune enrolled, for example, are Windows and Mac OS and perhaps Linux, will be controlled by device compliance. So Again, we covered that a little bit here. We have compliance policies. I'll just kind of glance back that you set up. So in our compliance policies that you set up in your environment, you get to choose what they are. Um, so we have like a device security policy where it just checks like uh, BitLocker, secure boots enabled, code integrity, all these things, firewalls enabled, antivirus, TPM, and make sure there's a minimum simple passwords are blocked, minimum password blank, etc. That there's an activity timer before a password required is set. All these things are required in order for a device to be marked compliant. So it's very similar to that mobile application protection, where you set like parameters of that it's checking for, and then it gives you a rating of whether you meet it or fail it. So with mobile application protection, if you fail it, you don't get access to the application. With device compliance, you just get marked non-compliant. Nothing really happens. Conditional access is where you set what happens here. So here we
Yeah.
grant access if they're compliant. And if they're not compliant, they won't have access. So if I log into a device that is Intune enrolled, but some reason I don't meet any of the criteria I set for compliance, like maybe I disabled antivirus somehow, then I try to access Outlook or whatever applications that we have in the tenant register. I'm getting an error saying I can't sign in. Um, and then so I kind of reach out to my IT and I find out why.
Great. There was a question earlier on. I was trying to find a right spot for it, so I'll just generically ask it now. Someone asked if you can control File Explorer. So I would assume that I didn't know if that was from like Android iOS context or Windows though. I suppose you'd need more uh, full device enrollment for that.
Yeah, for File Explorer, you would need full device enrollment. There are some application things here that you can set for, I think it's in 365, because there are some interactions with the File Explorer if you allow downloading, and I think in the protection policy as well. Let me just dive in. But typically for File Explorer access, because that's going to be for Windows devices, you do need a full MDM enrollment.
Okay. Yeah, he they did reply it's for Windows.
Okay. Yeah. So for Windows managing the file protection, that's going to be mostly device management, device configuration, not application. The application specific stuff is stuff like you can choose like where you're going to download, like where the locations are for downloads in the File Explorer, but not specifically the File Explorer control, depending on what kind of level of control you want to have. But in the search here, yeah, yeah, just my internet. But you can control stuff like file format, or I'm pretty sure you can control the download locations, but yeah, default file locations for things like that. But
Got it.
specifically File Explorer, depending on what kind of controls you want, MDM is going to give you the most control of that.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Um,
Someone asked, okay, so the compliance policy doesn't set anything. Yeah, that's correct. So, and feel free to watch. I think it was our first video in the series if you're new to the series. But configuration policies is where you set what gets applied on the device. And I guess that's some level of enforcement. Of course, they could probably override it, but then the compliance will check for that. And that's what the compliance is what you'll use in your other policies to gate access.
yeah.
Is there some level of hardcore enforcement you could do on configuration of settings?
Yeah, I mean configuration is very you can get very strict with configuration. So for configuration settings, like we've set up like our default policies. One thing that's important is you can also set up a policy for removing all other admins from the device. I don't have that set up, but essentially we have system restrictions setting catalog, right, that we created before. I believe this is available on our platform. But
Yes.
we disable guest accounts, and then there's a lot of different restrictions you have in here that you can create and enforce. Um, and you can get really granular. Again, this is all managed through I think this is a Mac one. Uh, I don't find a good one. This one, I guess, is very strict.
Yeah, that's one of our out-of-box recommendations that follows the whole CIS framework, right?
Correct. Yeah,
For
this is
Intune.
based on CSV8 for Intune specific. So it looked at their configuration, and we have all the settings mirrored here. It's very strict. It might be too prohibitive for some people. Like one common one I have is like the camera's disabled. Most people still need the camera, so you can import that and toggle it as you see fit. But yeah, you can kind of go through here and modify. Again, this is all through the settings catalog. So there's things you can search here to enforce. The main thing you'll want to enforce, which I don't think is in this one, but like disabling other admin accounts and removing admin rights. It used to be you couldn't like so when a device first enrolls in Intune, they get administrator rights by default. There's now a setting to turn that off, which we covered in the other webinar. But it used to be that there was no great way to remove that admin either. It had some weird like built-in admin rights, so it was a problem to remove it. Um, but yeah, essentially, if the person has admin rights, they're able to undo any settings you have. But the configuration, when you enforce a configuration policy, anytime Intune checks in with the device, which it does periodically, it's gonna reinforce like if I turned on camera, like even if I had admin rights on my machine, let's say, and I went in and I turned on camera in the registry settings, because you have to go to registry to change these.
Yep.
I can use my camera. Once Intune checks in, it's gonna go ahead and turn that back off.
Okay.
Uh, so that's what the
So it's
configuration.
continuous enforcement, but some things can still fall out of compliance, like your patching and so on, and then
Correct.
that's what would break compliance or your health.
Yes. Yeah. So like in our compliance policy, we have a minimum OS version, I think is one of the things as well. So if your device gets out of date, you can follow the compliance. And your compliance policies will just check everything. So just here, get device security. I think I went over this already, but these are all the checks it's looking for. And you can kind of control that, but there are just specific. It's not super granular with compliance. You can create a custom compliance one to do that if you want to. And there are some actions like for by default, it just marks it on compliant. You can add other actions like send an email or retire the device. So maybe you're very strict, and if a device falls on compliant, you just want it to like go away right away. You can set a grace period of how long it has to be not compliant for it to do that. I personally highly recommend, and we did cover this, is setting up an email and then so by default, it only sends an email to the end user the device is registered to. So you'll want to add an additional recipient and specify a distribution list ideally or a group or admin for that.
Someone to actually manage it and oversee it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So one question that did come up, and again, I said this is not an augment demo per se, but someone did ask, is there a way to copy these policies from one tenant to another? And like that's always the critical question for MSPs, right? These tools are set up for enterprise environments where, if you live in this tool all day long, for a single entity, it's perfectly fine. When it comes to MSPs, you're trying to do this across 10, 50, 100 tenants. This is where tools like Augment comes in. This is the part that we do. So we let you configure the environment or the policies that you want within, the great configurator in Microsoft. We import them with an augment, you template them, and now you can consistently, baseline and deploy across customers, avoid mistakes or changes or differences, so on and so forth, manage, monitor, alert, etc. So that is, the value that Augment tries to bring on top of this platform to help with that multi-tenancy aspect of it. Was this the majority of the content you were looking to cover in this session?
Yeah, I had one more about one more conditional access policy for if you have a P2 license, you can do a risky user block. So a P2 license can assess risky users in your environment. This is kind of similar to what we've seen. So we apply to all users. You may want to exclude like applications. They might determine like as a risky user just because of the way the sign-in works. Um, and then so you would choose like specific apps. Maybe we just care about 365. You can choose all apps. And what we do is the insider risk option. Essentially, anyone that has an elevated risk, so Microsoft determines that they're like a high risk user. Maybe they're signing in from countries that they shouldn't be signing in from, or like they should from the US and they signed in from like Europe all of a sudden and then back to the US, it seems like okay, that seems like something's wrong with that account. We can go ahead and block access to that account. Um, that's a great use case for the if you have a PC license, you have block response. Yeah, that was the those are the specific conditional access policies that I wanted to cover over like device and access granting. Yeah.
Awesome. I know we covered this last time, but someone was asking if we could show you how to create dynamic groups. I don't know if you want to just click into one of the ones we have
Sure.
done in the past. And interestingly, dynamic groups are things that are supported in Augment, so you can, create them once, baseline them across your customers very easily.
So for dynamic group, we go into groups, 365 group, membership type. We're going to switch that to dynamic user. You whatever the group name you want it to be, description, and choose if you want roles. Keeping the note here, if you want roles to be assigned to it at a later date, you cannot change this after the fact. So make sure if you want it to be, you must set up the first time. Most typically, you don't really want roles assigned to dynamic groups, but you might. And then you select a dynamic query. So the dynamic query is a series of questions you're asking to meet the criteria. So a most common one that I see is we want to have like the default dynamic group that's in all tenants is all users. All users,
Yep.
unfortunately, includes guest users, service accounts, etc. So we want to have an all users that's more realistic of like employees. So maybe we do all employees. So the first thing I like to do personally is like I want to make sure the account's enabled. I don't really care about accounts that are like disabled or blocked. So you set this and then you just set a value. And then it starts filling in the rule syntax. This is kind of key because if you weren't using Augment, which is really good for this, you would just copy and paste the rule syntax if you want to do multiple environments just to prevent the back and forth.
Yep.
So we want to check for accounts being enabled, and we want to also see that see, we want to, we only care about, I guess let's do, where is that?
They probably keep changing the variables on us.
Yeah, user type. User type. We're gonna go with member. So user type is like there's members and then there's guest tenants. So guests are anyone that you invite to your environment to like maybe share a document with. They become a guest in your tenant. So we don't care about actual members of our tenant in this environment. And then we're gonna add, um, and we only want to see licensed users. So make sure they have an assigned plan. Um, and we would save. So in this dynamic query that we just created, we're like, oh, save that.
I think it still wanted a value for any. Is that possible?
Yeah, I think that worked. And you can change the dynamic for any point, but you create the group. Build group. Here, remove this one just in
And
case.
this is why you only want to do them once and then copy them
Yeah, okay. But
once
any,
you figured it out.
yeah. So you create the group, the dynamic group. Once you've created the dynamic group, it actually goes through and basically scans your whole tenant to populate the members. So if I go through right away, there are look at that demo. Yeah, there should be no members right away. If I go to the overview, I can see the sync status, properties. Sorry, they moved stuff around. Um, Pretty sure it's in the overview. It's probably just still syncing. But it'll essentially, once it syncs, it'll show you what the group members are. They'll start to populate. We see here we have members. We remove the assigned plan. So this is anyone in our environment that is a member type and is enabled. So we have 383 members. Now, the cool thing I like about dynamic group, that's great for a top-down level, is you could create a group that let's say, I want to assign business premium licenses to certain people. Uh, Again, maybe everyone in my environment who's enabled needs to have a license. I can do it that way, and you can assign licenses to groups. Um, so that's a great way to control it. I've
So
had it
basically, you can
where
set it to do automated actions based on
yes,
matching a
criteria.
query.
Yeah, so I've had it where like in an environment that I managed before, they had certain titles, like let's say managers. Um, every manager need to have a business premium license. So we would go to like, okay, we're gonna make sure anyone that is again, I probably would just make sure that they're not a guest, just to exclude the this member. Then job title equals manager. Uh, so anyone that has a manager in their title is an enabled account. That's not a guest. Um, this will find them here, create that group, and then I can find it. And if I want to, I can assign a license to this group.
All right. So you
So
get different kind of licensing based on roles or
yeah,
other criteria. Yep.
yeah, it's been pretty helpful. A lot of people have like, especially when you have a big environment where they're changing all the time, but they're very strict about their specific controls. You can assign dynamic licensing that way. Some caveats I would warn against is like for example, Business Premium I think has a 50 gigabyte mailbox limit. I've had environments where certain users had much bigger mailboxes. And so in a situation, for example, one of those managers had been there for like 30 years and had like a 7 gig mailbox. So we actually had to exempt them from the policy. So they had a custom mailbox. Like their mail was that they had an exchange license for like a 100 gig mailbox. So that's one of the hangups for the dynamic, but for most cases, like it can save a lot of headache, especially like if people are switching positions. Sometimes the licensing gets out of place, or if you want to have like certain security groups that are signed, because you can now make this a member of a different group if I want to. Like this group could have another group that's a title. So like maybe managers will have maybe there's a SharePoint site that they get all access to. For example, there's a lot of those cases for that. That one's a great one because like SharePoint sites, like there's a manager SharePoint site all managers get access to, and any person gets hired. I have to go in and change every SharePoint site. It's kind of can get kind of cumbersome. But if you just have the dynamic group set up, it gets that all automatically managed where it just happens concurrently. It's happened where some people got promoted and they've switched titles, and so it helps them go in there. Other times, like someone gets demoted or switched to a different location, the job title changes, it automatically cleans up their old permissions so that they're not carrying stuff with them in any role. Lots of
Amazing.
cool dynamic groups.
Not to cut you off, but I think we're up on time here. The last thing I'll mention is someone did ask a question about moving devices between Entra joined and Entra registered and how to import them in Intune. So I think we'll take that question away, see if we're able to answer that in the upcoming webinar. I appreciate the question. Thank you very much. So we've got a copy of that. Again, thanks everyone. If you guys think of anything else you'd love us to cover, be it Intune, be it general M365 stuff, we're here for you. Just email us. And I know many of you have filled out the survey at the beginning. We thank you again for the time. Hopefully this was valuable, and we hope to see you next time. Thanks everyone. Have a great day.